The more children use social media, the higher was their daily intake of sugar and caffeine, mainly due to the consumption of energy drinks.
Hallo und herzlich willkommen zum Digital Public Health Podcast. Mein Name ist Rasmus Klöß und ich spreche heute mit Elida Sina, aber auf Englisch, weil Elida spricht deutlich besser Englisch als Deutsch und es ist angenehmer für sie, auf Englisch zu reden. Ich hoffe, ihr könnt uns trotzdem gut folgen. So, Elida, it's great that you're here. Elida Sina is a researcher at BIPS. She just finished her PhD. Congratulations on that. So it's, I think, great work of you. And you researched on social media and the impacts on children's health. Is that right?
Is that right?
Okay. Maybe you can just sum up your PhD, which is quite easy, in a few sentences.
Yes. So I investigated how digital media, with particular smartphone use and social media, influences different health outcomes in children and adolescents, including metabolic syndrome and cognitive functioning, but also related health behaviors such as eating habits or taste preferences. And we observed that a prolonged use of digital media in general and of social media in particular is associated with adverse health outcomes. Particularly with a higher risk for developing metabolic syndrome later in life and with a poor cognitive functioning as well. At the same time, social media negatively influences children's eating habits, especially it affects a high intake of sugar and caffeine and of fast food.
That is a lot to know actually about, and I'm really interested in digging a bit deeper on these, I think, underworld of social media, we could call it. But as a starter, when have you started feeling that you're a proper researcher, like for the first time? Do you remember?
Well, I still think whether I'm a researcher or not.
Okay. Still in progress.
Still a work in progress, yes. I would say when I published my second paper, not the first one. When I published the first paper, I was still not really knowing what I was doing. I had a lot of support from my advisors here at BIPS and other colleagues. But yes, when I published my second paper and I saw that there was people were reading my work and they were citing it. So even WHO cited my work, people from Harvard cited my work, and I was like, this feels good. I think being a researcher is good.
And what was the topic of the second paper you published?
It was on the role of social media on children's eating habits.
So you were directly in the topic we're talking today about. And you mentioned that there are many negative health effects of social media use on children's health. How could you see it in the data? For a start, what was the data you were using, for example?
So I'm using data based on the Idefix family cohort, which is a large cohort of children and adolescents from 9 different European countries, and I was lucky enough to work on this cohort. We have data on different measures of digital media, as I mentioned, smartphone, computer and game console use, television use, but also tablets. And recently we have also collected new data with regard to social media use, whether children use social media before going to sleep or right after waking up. So on the habits of social media that are also related to social media addiction. And then we also have large data on metabolic biomarkers where blood samples have been collected to measure insulin levels, glucose levels, but also blood pressure, HDL cholesterol, or BMI and other anthropometric measures. We also have information on indicators of cognitive functioning in children and adolescents, such as decision-making ability, the emotion-driven impulsiveness, so how impulsive children can be towards negative emotions, but also cognitive flexibility, which have been measured using questionnaires, computerized tests, and of course, then we also have data on food intake and other eating habits.
So you were lucky enough to have a quite good sample of a lot of data. On the one hand side, more health information, and on the other hand side, information on social media use.
Yes.
And you said that there are a lot of negative effects measured on the children. Was it more kind of a correlation? I mean, we are kind of a science podcast here, or is it more like a causation you could see there?
With regard to social media only?
Yeah.
The research I have been conducted on social media was mainly based on a systematic review. So I reviewed literature that was published worldwide, conducted in healthy children and adolescents, so without ADHD or eating disorders. And in this review, we included both randomized controlled trials, which are actually probably the only study design where we can draw conclusions on causality. And in these RCTs, it was found that when children viewed advertisements by social media influencers promoting unhealthy food products, this led to an increased intake of these unhealthy snacks later at ad libitum, which can lead to or can be interpreted as causal. So more social media exposure, less healthy are the eating outcomes in children. But we also included longitudinal and cross-sectional studies, which, of course, it's the quality of the study design kind of impedes drawing conclusions on causality, but there are plausible mechanisms that associate social media with unhealthy eating habits in children and adolescents.
So you could say that you have different sources, and they both, like most of the sources, direct in the direction that there is kind of a negative impact of social media use on healthy behaviors, or a kind of a
unhealthy food intake.
Exactly, yeah. So there is kind of you could show you have different data sets showing this correlation, you could say, or a causation maybe as well. And I think there are in Germany rules on, for example, advertisements in TVs. Is it right? Or like how much snacks could be advertised for kids in TV series, for example?
In Germany?
I think there is. Do you know more about that?
Not in my knowledge.
Okay.
I know that there is a huge debate recently regarding the regulation of food advertising. There are a few countries that I know that have introduced the regulation of food advertising in TV programs targeted at children, such as UK, for instance. They have this regulation of not advertising unhealthy food products on TV after 8 p.m., for instance. And there have been the introduction of regulations for social media as well, but only in few countries, such as Portugal, for instance. That comes now into my mind.
Okay, some countries have reacted, for example, on the advertisements, but not that much.
Yeah.
Would it be kind of a sensible way to reduce this negative impact?
The regulation?
Yeah.
That's what we are trying to promote and push forward. And that's what the conclusions that we can draw from the research that has been published up to now, that we need to regulate unhealthy food advertising on the digital media, especially because digital media now is the main tool that children and adolescents use, but is also one of the probably the most important tools for food companies themselves to advertise unhealthy food products to youth. So yes, regulation is very important and is one of the ways that we can help children against this unhealthy food advertising.
You mentioned some of these negative effects. Could you just sum up like the 3 main findings you had on these negative effects of social media on the health of children and adolescents?
Yes, so with regard to social media, more social media exposure was associated with unhealthy food intake.
So they eat unhealthier?
Yep. Yes, consumption of unhealthy snacks and beverages, sugar-sweetened beverages. The more children use social media, the higher was their daily intake of sugar and caffeine, mainly due to the consumption of energy drinks. And finally, more social media exposure was associated with a higher fast food preference. So the evidence directs towards the fact that more social media unfavorably affects children's food intake.
Okay, and like the thesis behind it would be that they are exposed to advertisements, and so they start to consume more of these unhealthy foods. Would it be kind of thing you think?
That's a good question, because that's one of the things or one of the aims that we wanted to achieve with a systematic review. It was exactly to understand what are the mechanisms, how social media influences children's eating behaviors. And we observed that when children, they view unhealthy food images online, they have a higher activation in brain areas that are related with reward, attention, and memory. That means that when children view these unhealthy food products online, their brain and especially their reward system activates. And this was then related with a higher intake of unhealthy snacks later after the experiment. So,
and is it higher than adults, for example, or is it doesn't matter? Does the age matter there, or is it doesn't matter? So if I would look at a burger on social media, will I react the same?
So there was no difference between children and adolescents. Their activation was similar. With regard to adults, we didn't focus on adults and we didn't compare the findings, but that's an important point to investigate in the future. However, previous studies that have also included obese in children and then have compared with the brain activation in adults have shown that this activation in the reward system is higher among children as compared to adults.
So that would point in this kind of the advertisement direction, you could say. Did you also thought about this thing, okay, people which use more social media would also snack more sweets, for example? So that would be kind of more this correlation problem. Is there research on that?
Well, there is a lot of research on mindless eating when in front of screens. So, but mainly on TV. So when we watch TV, we also tend to snack more, either sweet snacks or, popcorn or other salty snacks. So yeah, that's also one mechanism that can explain these
So that kids would swipe on TikTok, for example, and at the same time just snack chips because kind of like the same behavior you would do on TV, like watching TV, for example.
Yes, it's a similar correlation, I would say. And one main reason could be because their attention is directed to the screens themselves and not to the food that is being consumed.
So for effective interventions, it would be good for the future to know what kind of mechanisms are underlying on this behavior, wouldn't it be? So
Yeah, exactly.
will your future research go in that direction, or will you point in a different direction? Because I know that you will start as a postdoc researcher in January. So.
Yes. So actually, the main idea behind conducting this research was to actually feed into digital public health interventions that can use the conclusions and the mechanisms that we identified through this research that can later help children and adolescents via these digital tools. So we could use social media or smartphones to deliver interventions, and with the ultimate goal of improving health behaviors. With regard to my future research, now I will actually focus more on the role of social media and smartphone use on mental health, on children's and adolescents' mental health, and actually we will focus from childhood to adulthood. So using also new data from the EDFXI family cohort. And in particular, we want to investigate the long-term impact of social media and smartphone use on attention parameters, as well as on impulsivity and on general psychosocial well-being. Because we also want to understand what comes first, whether it is psychosocial well-being, a poor psychosocial well-being in early adolescence, for instance, that leads to a higher social media in young adulthood, or is it the vice versa? Is the social media that leads to poor mental health? And we can do this only using longitudinal studies.
So you're kind of going through all these, you could say, health dangers from social media. Do you use social media by yourself?
I started using it because I thought that I would never understand how social media can affect children if I don't use it myself. I think it was beginning of this year that I opened an Instagram account. And Instagram had recently introduced Reels. I think you know what I mean. And these are these very short-paced video segments where content creators or, companies, media, they produce content in maybe 30 seconds. And in these 30 seconds, there is a lot of information in these 30 seconds, if I can say it like that. And when I started watching these reels at the beginning, it drove me crazy. I was like, how can my brain as a 30-year-old woman be exposed to such an high content of and high amount of information, which was overstimulating for me. And then I was thinking, how does it affect children's brains? And I know that many children watch these reels, or even on TikTok, which I think reels are the main type of content. So yes, I can somehow maybe not via brain scans, but only by this very short observation on Instagram, I can understand the overstimulation and the digital stress that kids and teenagers are exposed to.
So you didn't really like it, the exposure? No?
Not really.
Like that. Okay. So you had a kind of a personal negative experience, you could say, on that. But people tend to use it, or tend to keeping using it. Do you have any ideas why? Is it just because of the short-term pleasure, or what would it be? You have research knowledge, or just own ideas on that?
Pleasure or rewarding effect is one of the main reasons why people use it, and maybe become also addicted to social media, because social media addiction is real, and it happens more often in teenagers and children rather than other age groups. But one other reason is also of how these social media platforms are designed and created, and they are based on what we call dark patterns. So these are features that are implemented on social media platforms, such as, for instance, this autoplay feature on YouTube or even on Instagram or on TikTok, or this never-ending content that every time that you open a new reel or another post, you will have millions of other similar contents with that. So these dark patterns also influence how much time we use social media in general. And when I open Instagram, honestly, I aim to stay 5 minutes, but then I'm 25 minutes or more.
You lost the time, it's true.
Yeah.
And when you're telling me all this, I get kind of the feeling that social media seems to be the sweets of the digital age, you could say. So like it's easy to snack and you have like the short-term pleasure, but in the end you will get sicker.
I like the parallelism.
Might be, yeah. It's just,
I sometimes call it dopamine shots.
it is, but putting it into you. But is there some kind of media use when you look at the data you observed from the Idefix family study, for example, where kids behave differently? For example, if they read a book, which is also kind of media use, did you collect data on that? Or, for example, maybe, listen to podcasts or whatever?
Not podcasts,
No.
not Idefix family. Unfortunately, we don't have information on the content, whether they are watching educational programs or whether they are using media for education. But other research in other countries has shown that when digital media is used for educational purposes, this is actually associated with better mental health and including self-esteem and better life satisfaction. So I would say that depending on the content that children or adolescents are exposed to and the patterns of using them, digital media can, of course, be helpful. And I know from personal or my own family, my nieces, they see digital media as critical for their well-being, because they can be online where their friends are and they can share their views on, I don't know, different climate change, for instance, because of course for adolescents it's very important, to self-present themselves and to self-disclose views on different topics, or even to share on their personal achievements or life in general. So yes, digital media and social media can be helpful for these reasons. But as I said, it's only about the patterns of the use and of course also on the age, because WHO or the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no digital media use at all for children less than 2 years. For instance.
Okay, less than 2 years. Yeah, I was just thinking about where's the age gap.
Yeah, less than 2 years. Studies have shown definitely no benefits from social media use, except of video calling, such as, I don't know, video calling with grandparents or an aunt that lives abroad. While for kids 2 to 5, no more than 1 hour is recommended, and this should only be educational TV programs. And for the rest of the age range, the less media, the better. However, I still think we need more stricter recommendations with regard to the time of how much or how long digital media and social media especially should be used. And of course, this is needed. This can be concluded only by further research.
Yeah, it's interesting how you divide by the kind of different uses, because I can totally understand the importance for adolescent to, for example, express their views on social media. Might be even, I often think for my own kids, I wouldn't mind if they send something out, for example, a message or a good video. I mean, it could be art, it could be something where they need to think about it. But I wouldn't like having them like being there, consuming all the time, just like being in a feed and just having these short-term rewards. Would that be like the how to change social media to make it more healthy, you could say, or better for the mental health as well?
Do you mean whether we need to kind of change the narrative within the digital media companies, or?
Yeah, I think it's tough. So yeah, tough question, because I think they want to make money. That is what businesses do, and I think it's kind of fine for them to do it. But on the other hand, we see that that is actually destroying or harming our kids.
Yes.
So we need kind of to find a thin line between, because I think there is kind of a healthy way to use it, but it's dominated nowadays by a really unhealthy way. So maybe it might be regulations. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we need to handle this in a multidisciplinary way, and we need to accept that digital media companies are there because they want their own profit. Of course, we need to put more pressure on these companies, such as, for instance, not allowing children less than 13 years to use social media, for instance, and they need to have more filters on how to identify properly the age of the kids that are opening a new social media account. And nowadays, everyone can have social media account just by faking their age. So in this case, they need, in my opinion, to have proper ways of identifying the real age of those who register on a social media account. Then they might introduce new features on social media, such as allowing parents to control the content that their children or teenage child is watching on social media. Instagram has tried to introduce this feature, for instance, but it was only this summer, and I don't know any research or of any result of how much parents are using these features to control the content that their teenagers are watching on Instagram. And then regulation, in my view, is also necessary, and it's governments, but also us researchers that should push this forward, especially with the advertising of unhealthy products. And this should be done, in my opinion, throughout across all social media platforms. For instance, let's talk about weight loss products. Weight loss products are not allowed to be advertised on Instagram, but they are being advertised on TikTok. TikTok is widely unregulated, so we need to put more pressure on TikTok. And if this is regulated on Instagram or YouTube, that means that digital media companies can actually take proper measures to protect children and adolescents online. So we need to push this forward also with unhealthy food products that are still being advertised across all social media platforms. And then I would say we also need to take measures outside of the digital media sphere, which means introducing digital media in the school curricula. So here we can mention the role of the parents, but then teachers can also play a major role by helping children from an early age to understand how to use digital media properly, to increase their digital media literacy, to know how to identify dark patterns online, to understand and to know that social media is not real life, that when someone posts a picture online, he has filtered that from 100 pictures. He has chosen only that picture that represents himself the best. Filters are also used on social media, and maybe that's going back to the digital media companies. Maybe filters shouldn't be used anymore. at least those that, or they can be used, but there could be an, let's say,
a mark on
a mark, exactly,
that
says that
it's not true.
This picture has filters, or that can help teenagers when they compare themselves with their peers or celebrities online. Then they can understand that this picture is not real and it has been edited. So these kind of measures, I think, if all stakeholders would take actions with regard to one aspect that I mentioned, maybe, yes, the digital environment and the digital media world will be a better space for young kids.
That were great last words, I think. I had some more questions on the topic, but I think you summed up the topic so perfectly. I just want to thank you again for your time. I wish you luck on your research. I think there's much more to come on the field.
Yes.
I take with me that there are many dangers, you could say, for the health and well-being of kids on social media. On the one hand, more on this kind of a brain side, where they are affected by the multitude of impressions you're getting, and on the other hand, by, you could say, the advertisements or the other interests they are kind of pushed on them there. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening today to the Digital Public Health Podcast, this time in English, next time again in German.